Heidi, Chapter 1. Two Grandfathers. On a sunny June morning, a tall, young woman climbed up a high Swiss mountain with a 5-year-old girl. The air smelled of mountain flowers. The child was wearing mini clothes and looked very hot. They came to Dorfly, a small village. Dorfly was halfway up the mountain. A woman joined them. "Where are you going, Didi?" she asked. "Is this girl your sister's child?" "Yes," Didi said. "I'm taking her to her grandfather. I got a wonderful job in Frankfurt. I can't take care of her any more." "What?" said the woman. "The child can't live up there with that old man. He doesn't talk to anyone and never goes to church. Everyone is afraid of him. I don't know why, but you must know." Didi wanted to talk, but did not want Heidi to hear. She looked around. Heidi was far away. She was climbing with Peter and his goats. Didi was not worried. Heidi could take care of herself. Uncle had a big farm, Didi said, but he had bad friends and used all his money. He went away for a long time. One day, he came back with a little boy. Nobody would help him. He was so angry. He left and came to Dorfly. People liked the boy, so they accepted the old man and called him Uncle. The boy grew up and married my sister. They were happy, but he died 2 years later. It was a shock for my sister. She also died soon. People said this happened because Uncle had done bad things. He became so angry and went up to live on the mountain. And people called him Uncle Elm. He has not talked to anyone or gone to church since then. My mother and I took my sister's baby. Last summer, my mother died, and now, as I said, I have this wonderful job. But where are you going now? They had come to a small, old hut. The woman said she had to see Peter's mother who lived there. Peter lived with his mother and his old blind grandmother, whom everyone called Granny. He left very early every morning to take goats to a place high up the mountain. He also came back very late. After the woman left, Didi looked for the children. Finally, they came. Heidi was wearing only a slip. She had wanted to run freely with Peter and had taken off all her clothes. Didi was very angry. She gave Peter some money and told him to run back and get Heidi's clothes. An hour later, they came to Uncle Elm's hut. The sun shone on the hut. There were 3 big old fir trees. The view was beautiful, and there was a lot of grass for the goats above. Uncle Elm was sitting with a pipe in his mouth. Dee told him her story. Uncle became very angry and told her to go away. After Dee left, Heidi looked around happily. She listened to the sound of the wind in the fir trees. Then she wanted to go in the hut. Her grandfather told her to bring her clothes, but she said she did not need them anymore. She wanted to be able to run around like the goats. Her grandfather was pleased, but told her to bring them anyway. The hut was 1 room. There was very little in it. It was everything the old man had. Heidi looked for a place to sleep. There was a ladder near the bed. She went up and found a wonderful place with hay. From a round hole in the wall, she could look down the mountain. Her grandfather got some cloth and made a bed for her with hay. After eating some cheese, milk, and bread, Heidi watched her grandfather clean the place for goats and make a chair for her. Everything was interesting. The sound of the wind made her happy. She danced and jumped around. Then Peter brought the goats, Daisy and Dusky, back. Heidi loved them. Her grandfather watched her. He saw that she was helpful and noticed everything. He gave her some milk from Daisy and some bread. Heidi enjoyed the milk and food so much. That night, the wind was very strong. The old man thought she might be afraid and went to look. The moon shone through the hole. Heidi was fast asleep with a happy look on her face. He watched her for a while, then went to bed. The next morning, the sun shone through the hole. Heidi woke up and jumped out of bed. Here she could run outside and play. How exciting! Her grandfather said she could go with Peter. But first, he said, "You must wash, or the sun will laugh at you." It was so beautiful that morning. The sky was blue, the sun shone on the grass and all the flowers. Heidi ran everywhere. She wanted to see everything. Peter had trouble watching Heidi and the goats. When they stopped climbing, Heidi's apron was full of flowers. The mountains were still covered with snow. Everything was so quiet. Blue and yellow flowers covered the ground. There was a loud noise. It was a very big bird. Peter said it was a hawk that lived on top of the mountain. When it was time to eat, Peter got milk for Heidi from Daisy. She drank, but ate only a small piece of bread. She gave the rest of her bread and cheese to Peter. Peter was so surprised and happy. He never had enough food to give to someone else. Peter told her the names of all the goats. Heidi played with them. She felt very sorry for one goat, Snowflake, because Peter said its mother had been sold and it was unhappy. Peter and Heidi saved a little goat that went to a dangerous place. Peter wanted to beat the goat. Heidi was very angry. Finally, Peter said he would not beat the goat if Heidi gave him her cheese the next day. She promised to give him all her cheese every day if he never beat the goats again. The sun was going down. Everything became golden, and the tops of the mountains shone. Heidi jumped up and said, "Peter, Peter, a fire! The mountains, the snow, and the sky are on fire." "It always looks like that," said Peter. "It will be like that tomorrow, too." When Heidi got back, she told her grandfather how beautiful everything was. She opened her apron to give him the flowers, but they had all died. The flowers wanted to stay in the sun and didn't like being in your apron, the old man said. Heidi said she would never pick flowers again. She asked why the hawk made so much noise. "He laughs at all the people who live in villages and make trouble for each other," he said. "The best," said Heidi, "was the evening fire." "That is how the sun says good night to the mountains," her grandfather explained. "He sends that beautiful light so they won't forget him until the next morning." That night, Heidi dreamed about the mountains, the flowers, and Snowflake running happily around. Heidi went out with Peter and the goats every day during the summer. She became brown, strong, and healthy. She was so happy with her new life. Then autumn came. The winds became too strong. Heidi had to stay home. Peter and the goats missed her, but Heidi was still happy. She liked watching her grandfather work and loved the sound of the wind in the fir trees. It was like a strange music for her, and she had to go out when she heard it. Winter came. Snow covered everything, and soon came up to the windows. But Peter wanted to see Heidi and came to visit. He went to school during the winter, but did not like it very much. They talked so much. When he was leaving, he said that his grandmother wanted to see Heidi. Heidi wanted to go very much, and asked her grandfather to take her every day. Finally, he agreed. He got a big cloth to keep her warm, and they flew down the mountain on a sleigh. The snow on the fir trees shone in the sun. It was so beautiful. Heidi went into Peter's hut alone. It was old and very small. Granny could not believe that the old man had brought her. Peter had told her about the old man, but she had not believed Peter. Heidi could not understand why Granny could not see. She thought it was terrible. Granny could not see the shining white snow or the sun when it said good night to the mountains. She began to cry very hard, but Granny said that just hearing Heidi's voice made her happy. The afternoon passed very quickly for Granny. Soon Peter came home from school, and it was time for Heidi to leave. At home, Heidi asked her grandfather to fix Granny's hut. Doors and other things were loose and made so much noise. It made Granny afraid at night. The old man looked at her. Heidi was so sure he could do anything. Then he said he would fix the hut. Granny and Peter's mother could not believe it when the old man started fixing the hut. They tried to thank him, but he would not talk to them. He said he knew what they really thought of him. Every fine day that winter, Heidi went to visit Granny, and the old man fixed the hut. Poor Granny was so happy after many sad, dark years. When Heidi came, time passed so quickly. Granny always prayed that Heidi would be safe and Uncle Elm would stay in a good mood. Heidi was very sad when she finally understood that Granny would never see again. But Granny told her many times that it was not so terrible to be blind when Heidi was with her. After Grandfather fixed the hut, Granny did not hear any noises at night. Chapter 2. 2 Visitors. A year passed and Heidi's second winter was almost over. She was 7 now. Peter had brought messages from the school teacher in Dorfly who said Heidi should go to school. But Uncle Elm did not want to send her. One morning in March, the pastor from Dorfly came. He told Uncle Elm that Heidi had to go to school and learn to read and write. She can grow up with the goats and the birds, said Uncle Elm. They won't teach her anything bad. She'll be happy. Anyway, I won't let her go up and down the mountain in the cold winter. The pastor said they should live in Dorfly during the winter, but Uncle Elm said he would not live where people hated him. Uncle Elm was in a very bad mood after the pastor left. Then, after dinner, Dee came. She had a hat with a feather and a long dress. I always planned to come back for Heidi, she said. Now I found some rich people in Frankfurt. Their girl can't walk and wants someone to play with. It's a wonderful chance for Heidi. When Uncle Elm refused, Dee became very angry. She said she would go to court if he did not let her take the child. Take her then, he shouted. But don't ever bring her back to me. I don't want to see her with a feather in her hat or hear her talk the way you do. Heidi saw that her grandfather was very angry and did not want to go. But Dee took her. She said Heidi could come back any time if she did not like it in Frankfurt. As they passed by Granny's hut, Granny cried, Don't take the child away from us. But Dee did not stop. She told Heidi she could get some nice, soft, white rolls for Granny in Frankfurt. They almost ran through the village. People thought Heidi was running away from Uncle Elm. After that, Uncle Elm became more quiet. He looked so angry that everyone was afraid of him. People said it was good that the child had run away, but Peter's granny always said the old man had been kind to Heidi and had even fixed her hut. Uncle Elm never went to Granny's hut any more. The days were long for Granny now. She would often say sadly, "I wish I could hear that dear child's voice just once more before I die." Chapter 3. Frankfurt. Heidi went to Mr. Sussman's house in Frankfurt. His wife had died and his daughter, Clara, could not walk. He had hired Miss Rottenmeier to take care of Clara, the house, and the servants. He often went away on business. Then Miss Rottenmeier took care of everything, but Clara could have and do anything she wanted. Miss Rottenmeier was not happy about Heidi. She did not like the child's clothes or hat. Then she found out that Heidi was 7 and had never gone to school. Clara was 12, but before she could say anything, Dee ran out of the house. "Are you glad you came here?" Clara asked. "No, but I'll go home again tomorrow with some nice rolls for Granny," said Heidi. "You are a funny child," said Clara. Clara's lessons were usually no fun. Things might be different now with Heidi, she thought. At dinner, Heidi found a nice white roll. "May I have this?" she asked the servant, Sebastian. He did not speak, and tried very hard not to smile. She put the roll in her pocket. Miss Rottenmeier said Heidi must not speak to Sebastian during meals. She started to tell Heidi some other things, but Heidi was already asleep. The next morning, Heidi jumped out of bed. She wanted to look outside, but the windows were too high. There were walls and windows everywhere. She felt like a bird in a cage and was afraid. Somewhere outside there must be green grass, but she could not see any grass or the sky. After breakfast, Heidi asked Clara, "How can I look outside?" Clara said Sebastian could open a window for her. Heidi was happy. Soon she began to tell Clara about the mountains and the goats. Then the teacher, Mr. Usher, came. During the lesson, Miss Rottenmeier heard a big noise. She ran into the room. The floor was covered with books, papers, and ink. Heidi was near the front door. "I heard the fir trees, but I can't see them anywhere," said Heidi. The sound was a carriage. In the afternoon, Heidi asked Sebastian to open a window. She looked out, but there were only streets with stone. She asked where she could see more. Sebastian said she could see far away from the top of a church with a gold ball. Heidi ran out. She could not see the church. She saw a boy with a monkey. He said he would take her if she gave him money. Heidi said Clara would give him the money. But when she got to the top of the church, she could only see the roofs of other houses. She was very sad. Then she saw a big basket full of kittens. They were so cute. The man at the church said she could have them. She knew Clara would love them. She took 2, and the man said he would take the rest to Mr. Sessman's house. When she got back, Sebastian told her Miss Rottenmeier was waiting. It was dinner time. Miss Rottenmeier was so angry, but every time she said something, she heard meow from Heidi. That made Miss Rottenmeier even more angry. "It's not me, it's the kittens," said Heidi. "What? Kittens? Here?" cried Miss Rottenmeier. "Sebastian, come and take these horrible animals." She was afraid of cats and ran out of the room. Sebastian laughed so much. Clara started to play with the kittens and asked him to help them. He promised to put them in a safe place. The next day, a boy came and said Clara had to give him money. Sebastian told Clara. Clara wanted to see the boy. He came in and began to play music. Miss Rottenmeier heard it and came in. When she saw the monkey, she cried and jumped and finally fell in a chair. "Sebastian, take that boy and his animal away. Now!" she shouted. Sebastian took the boy to the door and gave him some money. Soon it was quiet again. Miss Rottenmeier stayed in the room. She wanted the children to study properly. Then Sebastian came with a big basket for Clara. The top opened, and suddenly the room was full of kittens. Some bit the teacher, and others climbed on Miss Rottenmeier. Clara loved them. They were so pretty. Sebastian finally took them away. Miss Rottenmeier wanted to punish Heidi, but Clara asked her to wait until her father came home. Clara was very happy. Life was fun now. Heidi would tell her about the mountains. Then she would want to go home, but Clara asked her to stay until her father came home. More days meant more rolls for Granny, but at night Heidi missed home so much. Then she remembered that Dee said she could go home any time. She tried to leave, but Miss Rottenmeier stopped her. "I want to go home. Snowflake and Granny must miss me, and here I can't see the sun saying good night to the mountains, and if a hawk flew over Frankfurt, he would make more noise because there are so many people who are not nice," Heidi cried. Miss Rottenmeier thought she was crazy. Sebastian tried to make her feel better. He said they could go see the kittens. The next day, Miss Rottenmeier found Heidi's rolls. She told a servant to throw all the rolls and Heidi's hat away. Heidi started to cry very hard. Clara said, "Please stop. I promise I'll get you mini rolls to take to Granny when you go home. They'll be soft and new. Yours must be all hard by now." Finally, Heidi stopped crying. A few days later, Mr. Sessman came home. "So this is our little Swiss girl," he said. Heidi said Clara was very nice to her, and Clara said she was happy with Heidi. Clara told him all about the kittens, the rolls, and everything. Mr. Sessman laughed very hard. He finally understood why Miss Rottenmeier had told him Heidi was crazy. Mr. Sessman had to leave again after only 2 weeks. Clara was sad, but he said that her grandmother was coming. Clara became so happy. She told Heidi all about Grandmama. Grandmama came the next day. She had pretty white hair and 2 big ribbons in her little cap. Heidi thought she was wonderful. Grandmama told Miss Rottenmeier that she had brought some books for Heidi. Miss Rottenmeier told her that Heidi could not read. Grandmama felt this was strange. Heidi liked the big picture books, but suddenly she began to cry. There was a picture of a boy and some animals. The sun was going down, and the grass was golden. Grandmama asked her why she could not read. Heidi said it was too difficult. Peter had said so. Grandmama said if Heidi learned to read, she could have the book. Heidi was so happy. Heidi had changed after she tried to go home. She knew now that she could not go home for a long time. She did not want to eat and cried at night. Grandmama saw that Heidi was not happy. She asked why, but Heidi said nothing. So she told her to tell everything to God. Heidi felt happier. She ran to her room and asked God to help her go home. A week later, Grandmama asked Mr. Usher about Heidi. Mr. Usher could not understand it, but Heidi could now read. One afternoon, Grandmama asked Heidi again why she was not happy. Heidi would not tell her. Grandmama asked if she had told God. Heidi said God did not listen. Then Grandmama told her that God does what is best for us. If we do not pray because God does not do what we want, God may stop caring for us. Heidi listened carefully. Then she went to her room and asked God to forgive her and not to forget her. After Grandmama left, Heidi often read to Clara. One day she read about a dying grandmother. She thought about Granny and started to cry. Miss Rottenmeier became very angry. She told Heidi to stop, or she would take the book away. Heidi became very afraid and stopped. She never cried again. Autumn and winter passed, and Heidi wanted to go home more and more. In Frankfurt, there were no trees or grass or flowers or mountains. She did not eat and cried in bed all the time. Then strange things began to happen. Every morning, the front door was wide open. Nothing was stolen. The door was locked every night. Sebastian and another servant tried to find out what was happening. At 1 o'clock they went to look. The wind from the open door blew out their candle. There was something white on the stairs. They became so afraid. Everyone was afraid. Miss Rottenmeier asked Mr. Sessman to come home. He thought it was not serious, but came home. He asked his friend, Dr. Clausen, to wait with him. Around 1 o'clock they heard the door. They went out. There was Heidi in her white nightgown. Heidi had been walking in her sleep. The doctor took Heidi back to bed and talked to her. Heidi said she dreamt every night that she was back in the hut. She would hear the wind and go out to look. "Does anything hurt?" the doctor asked. "No, but I feel like I have a big stone in my throat," Heidi said. "Something you ate?" he asked. "No, I want to cry, but Miss Rottenmeier said I must not cry." The doctor told Mr. Sessman that Heidi had to go home. Mr. Sessman did not want to send her back to her grandfather when she looked so sick. But the doctor said she would get worse if she stayed. Mr. Sessman was not happy, but said he would send Heidi home. Chapter 4. Home Again. The next day, Sebastian took Heidi home. Clara was sad, but her father said she could go to Switzerland the following year. Clara gave Heidi many nice dresses, and also 12 beautiful rolls for Granny. At the bottom of the mountain, Sebastian and Heidi met a man with a small cart. He was going to Dorfly. Heidi said she would go alone with the man. Sebastian gave her a package and a letter for her grandfather. In Dorfly, many people asked Heidi why she had come back. She said everyone in Frankfurt was very kind, but she wanted to be with her grandfather. When she got to Granny's hut, she ran in and cried, "It's Heidi, Granny!" Granny was so surprised. Big tears fell down her face. She held Heidi and said, "It's really you, child." Heidi gave her the rolls. Then she took off her pretty dress and hat with a feather. She gave the hat to Peter's mother, saying, "I don't want it any more." She put on her old hat and left. The evening sun shone red on the mountains. Everything looked so beautiful. The mountains and grass were all red and gold. Little pink clouds were in the sky. Tears fell down Heidi's face. She thanked God for letting her come home again. Her grandfather was sitting outside the hut with his pipe. Heidi ran up and cried, "Grandfather, grandfather!" His arms went around her. Tears came to his eyes. The package had money to buy a bed for Heidi. After her grandfather read the letter, he asked if Heidi could drink some milk. For Heidi, that milk was the most delicious thing in the world. When Peter came, he was so surprised to see her. The goats all remembered her and went to her. That night, her grandfather went to look at her about 10 times, but Heidi was sleeping so well in her lovely bed of hay. She was home again. The next day, Heidi went to see Granny. Her grandfather went to Dorfly to get her things. She read some hymns for Granny. Granny was so happy. Tears fell down her face. Granny had enjoyed the rolls so much. Suddenly, Heidi had an idea. She could buy rolls every day with the money Mr. Sussman gave her. She asked her grandfather if she could on the way home. He said it was her money. Heidi was so happy. "Oh, grandfather," she said, "isn't everything wonderful? God did know what was best. I learned to read because I stayed in Frankfurt. Grandmama was right. We must pray every day and not forget God, or He may forget us." "What if we forget Him?" the old man asked. "Then we must ask Him to forgive us," she said, "and He will. It says so in the book Grandmama gave me." A man used all the money his father gave him and became very unhappy. He decided to ask his father to forgive him. He went home and said, "I have done things against heaven and you. I cannot say I am your son." But his father was so happy. He gave him new clothes and made a wonderful dinner. That night, the old man looked at the sleeping child. He put his hands together and said, "Father, I did things against heaven and you. I cannot say I am your son." 2 big tears fell down his face. The next morning was a beautiful Sunday morning. He told Heidi to put her best dress on. They were going to church. Church bells rang everywhere. Everyone noticed when Heidi and Uncle Elm came into church. Afterwards, they went to the pastor's house. Uncle Elm told the pastor he had been wrong. He would move to Dorfly during the winter. The pastor was very nice and happy to hear the news. People had been watching them. "He can't be so bad," they said. "He's so gentle with the child." When they came out, everybody wanted to talk to him. They were very friendly and happy to hear that he would come to Dorfly for the winter. As they went home, Heidi said, "Grandfather, you look so different, nicer and nicer." "I am happy today," he said. "It is good to be with God again. I'm happy He sent you to me." He also went in to see Granny. She was so happy to see him, and thanked him for fixing the hut. Peter's mother tried to give him back Heidi's hat. He smiled at Heidi when he saw the feather and told Peter's mum to keep it. Church bells rang as they went back up the mountain. The evening sun shone on their hut. Chapter 5. A Visitor for Heidi. In September, the kind doctor who sent Heidi home went to see Mr. Sussman. His hair had become white, and he looked very sad. His only daughter died recently. Mr. Sussman asked him, "Can Clara go to Switzerland?" The doctor said she was too weak. "Maybe next spring," he said. Clara was very sorry. Her father said maybe the doctor could go instead. "Oh, yes," said Clara. "Then I can send Heidi many presents, and the doctor can tell me about her." Heidi had been waiting for weeks for Clara. She did not go out with Peter and clean the hut every day. Then, one day, she saw the doctor coming. She was so excited. The doctor was surprised. He did not think Heidi would remember him. She asked where Clara and Grandmama were. The doctor said Clara was very sick and could not come. Heidi was very sorry, but spring would come soon. Uncle Elm asked the doctor to stay for a long time. There was an inn in Dorfly. From there, the doctor could come up the mountain every day. They got some milk, cheese, and meat for the doctor. Everything tasted so good in the mountain air. The doctor knew the air would be good for Clara. The doctor took out the presents. There was a warm coat for Heidi, a box of special soft cakes and a warm shawl for Granny, a big sausage for Peter, and tobacco for Uncle Elm. The sun began to go down. Heidi and Uncle Elm went with the doctor to Peter's home. Heidi asked the doctor to go out with Peter the next day. Granny was so happy about the shawl. It would be warm in the winter. Peter's mother had never seen such a big sausage. When Peter saw it, he could not speak. The next day, the doctor came up from Dorfly with Peter. He tried to talk to Peter, but Peter did not say very much. Uncle Elm put a large piece of meat in the lunch bag for the doctor. As they went up, Heidi told the doctor all about the goats, the mountains, and the flowers. They got to Heidi's favorite place. The snow on the mountains shone in the sun. Flowers were everywhere. The doctor enjoyed it, but still looked sad. Heidi wanted to help him. She told him the words to one of Granny's favorite hymns. He listened quietly. He remembered when he was a boy. Peter was not happy. Heidi had finally come with him, but now was talking only to the doctor. He shouted that it was time to eat. The doctor only wanted milk, so Heidi told Peter he could have all the food. When Peter saw the meat, he was so happy. He felt sorry that he had been angry before. Heidi and the doctor went higher up on the mountain and talked a lot. The weather was fine all month. The doctor came every day. He often walked and talked with Uncle Elm. Uncle Elm showed him many flowers and told him about the animals. He learned a lot from Uncle Elm. Sometimes he went with Heidi. Peter did not mind the doctor any more. Then it was time to go back to Frankfurt. The doctor did not want to go. Uncle Elm and Heidi were also sorry to see him go. "I wish you could come with me," the doctor said to Heidi. "It would be nicer if you came back to us," Heidi said. But when she saw the tears in his eyes, she ran after him and said she would go with him. "No, you will become sick again," he said. but maybe you can come if I am ever sick or lonely." "Oh yes, I'll come," Heidi promised. "And I love you almost as much as grandfather." As he left, he thought, "This is a wonderful place for sick minds and sick bodies. I feel like I want to live again." Chapter 6. Winter in Dorfly. The snow was very deep that winter. Peter had to jump out of the window in the mornings. Uncle Elm took Heidi and the goats to Dorfly. They rented a big old house. Grandfather fixed the big holes in the roof and walls. He brought Heidi's hay bed from the hut. Heidi liked their new home very much. On the first night, Heidi woke up. She could not hear the fir trees. She felt strange. Then she heard her grandfather talking to the goats. She knew then that it was not the hut, but it was home. Heidi wanted to see Granny, but the snow was still too soft. Finally, it became hard. Heidi was so excited that she could hardly eat. Granny was not feeling very well. It was so cold. She had her shawl on and was in bed. Her bed was not very nice. Heidi wished she could give Granny her bed in Frankfurt. It had 3 big pillows. Then Granny could sleep well and be warm. But she read some hymns for Granny and prayed that night that Granny would soon feel better. Peter did not like to go to school. The snow was hard, but he did not go. Uncle Elm said he would do something to Peter if Peter did not go. Peter went to school the next day. Peter always said he could not learn to read properly. Heidi did not believe him. She decided to teach Peter. "If you don't learn," she said, "you'll have to go to Frankfurt. The teachers there are not nice at all." Peter felt afraid. Heidi had a book about letters. It said, "Terrible things happen to people who do not learn their letters." Peter learned. One day, Peter came home and said he could now read. He read a hymn for Granny. She was so surprised. The teacher at school was even more surprised. He had tried to teach Peter for years. He asked what happened. "It was Heidi," Peter answered. The teacher also noticed that Peter now came to school every day. He asked why. "Uncle Elm," was the answer. Everyone in the village talked about Heidi and her grandfather. They did so much good in the village. Peter could read now, but if there was a difficult word, he would not read it. So Granny had trouble understanding what he read. She waited for spring when Heidi could come and read to her again. Chapter 7. More Visitors. May came then. The last snow was gone. The streams were full of water. The mountains were green, and the sun was warm. Flowers came out, and the old hawk flew once more. Heidi was back on the mountain. She sat in the grass and heard the wind. Spring was so beautiful. Grandfather was making some chairs for Grandmama and Clara. Just then, Peter brought a letter from Clara. It said they would leave in a few days. First, they would go to Regaz. Clara would see a doctor there for about 6 weeks. Then they would go to Dorfly. Dr. Clausen kept saying how wonderful the mountain was. He looked so much younger when he came back. He wanted them to go soon. Peter was angry. He did not want more visitors from Frankfurt, but Heidi ran to tell Granny. Granny did not look very happy when Heidi told her. She thought the visitors would take Heidi away again, but she did not tell the child. May passed, and soon it was June. The days were longer, and the sun was hotter. One morning, Heidi saw some people coming up the mountain. 2 men carried a chair with a girl in it. A lady was on a horse. A man pushed a wheelchair, and another carried a big basket. They've come, Heidi shouted. What a wonderful place, said Mrs. Sussman. Oh, Grandmama, said Clara, I wish I could stay here forever. Oh, Heidi, I wish I could run around with you and see everything. Heidi pushed Clara's chair. They saw the fir trees and where the goats stayed. The goats were out with Peter. Heidi got some flowers for Clara. Uncle Elm brought a table and some chairs. He got some milk and cheese. Then they had dinner outside. Clara liked the food. She even had a second piece of cheese. They went in to see the hut. When they saw where Heidi slept, Clara cried, Oh, how lovely! You can see the sky and hear the fir trees from your bed. It also smells wonderful. Uncle Elm asked Mrs. Sussman if Clara could stay at the hut. Grandmama smiled at him. She also thought it would be good for Clara to stay there. They made a nice bed for Clara next to Heidi's bed. Uncle Elm said Clara should stay about 4 weeks. The children were so happy. Mrs. Sussman decided to go back to Regaz. She would come to the mountain once in a while. When Peter arrived, Heidi showed Clara the goats. Peter watched them. He looked angry. That night, Clara looked out at the stars. It was so lovely. Heidi said, When the stars shine, God is saying He cares about us, so we shouldn't be afraid. Clara could not sleep right away. She watched the stars. That night, she dreamt about the stars also. The next morning was also beautiful. Uncle Elm took Clara outside and put her in her chair. Clara smelled the cool mountain air and the fir trees. She felt the warm sun on her face and hands. Grandfather got some milk from Daisy. Clara tried goat's milk for the first time. It was so sweet. Uncle Elm was happy to see her drink it. He told Peter to let Daisy eat the best grass. Her milk had to be very good. Peter looked at the girls. He asked Heidi to go with him, but she said she could not while Clara was there. Peter looked angrily at the wheelchair. Clara and Heidi had promised to write to Grandmama every day. Clara did not want to go inside. Heidi brought a chair out. Clara kept looking around and listening to the sounds. It was hard to think of writing. Clara could not wait for Uncle Elm to bring her milk. It was so strange. She never liked to eat before. Heidi understood. She never wanted to eat in Frankfurt either. Clara finished her milk before Heidi did. Then they ate bread with a lot of butter. Uncle Elm was pleased to see Clara eat so well. After a few days, some men brought 2 beds for Heidi and Clara. Mrs. Sessman said they could take one to Dorfly in the winter for Heidi. Every morning, Clara thought, "Oh, how wonderful! I'm still here at Heidi's." The food was good for her. She was full of life, and her eyes were bright. After 2 weeks, Uncle Elm asked her to try to stand. It hurt, but she tried every day. Every evening, the snow and the mountains were covered with purple, pink, and gold. Heidi wanted Clara to see the colors higher up on the mountain. Grandfather said he would take them the next day. When Heidi told Peter, he just hit one of the goats. That night, Clara dreamt of all the flowers. Heidi dreamt of the hawk crying, "Come, come." Uncle Elm put the wheelchair in front of the hut. He went in to get the children. Peter came. He felt very angry. Heidi was always with that girl. She never came with him. Even today, she only wanted to show everything to that girl. He saw the wheelchair. It was the reason for all his troubles. Suddenly, he pushed the chair. It rolled down the mountain. Faster and faster it went. Finally, it broke into many pieces. Peter laughed. Now, that girl had to go away. Heidi would go out with him again. Heidi, Grandfather, and Clara came out. They looked everywhere, but could not find the wheelchair. "Maybe the wind blew it away," said Heidi. Then her grandfather saw the chair. "That's strange," he thought. "It did not go straight down." Clara was so sad. "Now we can't go," she cried, "and I may have to leave." But Grandfather said they would go anyway. He looked for Peter. Peter was higher up the mountain. When Uncle Elm asked him about Clara's chair, he said, "What chair?" in a small voice. Uncle Elm said nothing. Uncle Elm left the girls with Peter. There were no clouds in the sky. The goats came and sat by them. Heidi went to look at the flowers. They were so lovely. She wanted Clara to see them too. She called Peter, but he did not come. He was thinking, "The chair is gone. Why is that girl here?" Heidi was angry. "Come here, Peter," she said, "or I'll do something you won't like." Peter was afraid. Maybe Heidi would tell Grandfather about the chair. He went at once. They held Clara up. Heidi asked her to try to walk. It did not hurt so much with Peter and Heidi there. "Oh, Heidi," Clara cried, "look at me. I'm walking. I'm walking." They sat among the flowers. They were so lovely and smelt so wonderful. Heidi had thought, "I wouldn't give Peter any food if he doesn't help me." But he did, so now she divided the food into 3 for lunch. Clara and Heidi could not eat everything, so they gave the rest to Peter. He ate it, but did not enjoy it very much. When Uncle Elm came, Heidi told him that Clara had walked. He was very happy and asked Clara to try again. He held Clara very carefully. Later, in Dorfly, everyone was looking at the broken chair. "The man from Frankfurt will be very angry," they said. Peter ran away. He was very afraid. A policeman might come and take him away. He did not eat. His mother did not know why. The next day, Uncle Elm told the children to write to Mrs. Sessman and say they had a surprise for her, but they wanted Clara to be able to walk alone before Grandmama came. Uncle said that would take about a week, so they asked Grandmama to come in a week. They did not tell her why. The next days were so happy for Clara. Each morning she thought, "I am well, I can walk." She ate so much and drank a lot of milk. Heidi noticed that Peter was acting very strangely. He always seemed afraid. Finally, Mrs. Sessman came. The children were sitting outside. Clara looked so well. "Where is your chair?" Mrs. Sessman asked. Then Heidi got up, and so did Clara. They walked to her. Clara had only one hand on Heidi's shoulder. Grandmama was so surprised. She half laughed and half cried as she held Clara. "My dear uncle, how can we ever thank you?" she said. "This is all because of you." "And God's good sun and his mountain air," said Uncle Elm. Mrs. Sessman wanted to tell Mr. Sessman. Uncle Elm called Peter and said, "Take this message to Dorfly. Ask them to send it to Paris." But Mr. Sessman also planned a surprise. His business finished early. He was climbing up the mountain. It seemed so far. Then he saw a boy. "Is this the way to Heidi's hut?" he asked. "The policeman," thought Peter. He ran away so fast that he fell and rolled all the way down to Dorfly. Mr. Sessman did not understand what had happened to the boy. Finally, he came to the hut. Two girls came toward him. The taller one was leaning on the shorter one. He stood still. Tears came to his eyes. He remembered Clara's mother. "Don't you know me, Papa?" cried Clara. "Am I so different?" He ran and held her. "Is it possible?" he cried. "I can't believe it." He was also happy to see Heidi. She looked so healthy. Then he talked to Uncle Elm. Mrs. Sessman saw some pretty blue flowers in a fir tree. "How lovely!" she cried. "Heidi, my dear, did you put those flowers there?" "No," said Heidi. "Someone else did." "Guess who got them?" Clara said. Just then they heard Peter. Mrs. Sessman thought he might have done it, and asked him. He looked so afraid. "Just tell me," she asked, "did you do that?" Peter felt Uncle watching him. "Yes," he said. "Well," she said, "why are you afraid?" Because it's all broken." He was shaking so much. Grandmama thought he was strange. Then Uncle Elm said he thought Peter was the wind that blew Clara's chair away. That was why he was afraid. But Mr. Sessman did not think he was a bad boy. Uncle told her how angry Peter had been about Clara. "Oh, the poor boy," she said. "Of course he was angry. We kept Heidi away from him." Peter, she said, you pushed the chair, but you knew that was bad, didn't you? And you felt bad inside, didn't you? That was just how Peter had felt. But things didn't happen as you expected, she said. It was good for Clara. Now she can walk. That's how God brings good out of bad. But next time you want to do something bad, remember how you felt this time. Yes, I will, said Peter. He was still afraid. That's enough then, Mrs. Sessman said. I want to give you something nice to remember us with. What would you like as a present? Peter could not believe it. A present? No policeman? Finally, he asked her for a penny. Then he could buy something at the fair in Dorfly. Mrs. Sessman laughed. She said Peter could have a penny every Sunday for the rest of his life. Peter thought he must be dreaming. Mr. Sessman was so happy about Clara, he wanted to do something for Uncle Elm. Uncle Elm said he was also happy. That was enough. But when he died, he wanted Mr. Sessman to take care of Heidi. Mr. Sessman said Heidi was already like a daughter to him. He would always take care of her. He also said that Dr. Clausen was planning to come to live near Heidi and Uncle Elm. Mr. Sessman asked Heidi what she wanted. She asked for the bed in Frankfurt with 3 pillows and warm cover for Granny. Mr. Sessman said he would send it right away. Heidi wanted to tell Granny. Since it was time to leave, they all went down the mountain together. Granny did not look so happy when Heidi told her about the bed. She still thought the people would take Heidi away. Mrs. Sessman said they would never take Heidi away. They would come to see her every year. Granny was so happy. Clara was sad to say goodbye, but Heidi said soon it would be summer again and Clara could come. Not long after that, Dr. Clausen came to Dorfly. He talked with Uncle Elm and bought the old house there. He fixed it so he could live in half and Uncle Elm and Heidi could live in the other half during the winter. The 2 men became very good friends. One day, the doctor said, "We both love that child so much. When I die, I'll leave everything to her, so she will be all right when we are both gone." Uncle Elm said nothing, but he held the doctor's hand for a long time. Heidi and Peter were with Granny. Heidi told them about everything that was happening. Granny asked Heidi to read a hymn. "I will spend the rest of my life thanking God for His goodness to us," she said. But still, that will not be enough. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.
Yeah.